Welcome, world. My name is Sarah Howes, and I am the editor-in-chief of Cyberus and Intellectual Property Law Review, and I am here with two of my amazing staff members, Mihajlo Bobovich.
Hi.
Right, there he is. So let me quickly grab their bios. So Mihajlo is a student at William Mitchell, and he is expected to graduate this spring in 2015. He studied music, piano specifically, at Carleton College, and his interests in law have developed accordingly. His focus has been accommodating IP law to address new technologies and digital distribution models. A child of the digital age, I love that phrase.
Yes, I am.
Bobovich is well-versed in various social media platforms and the distribution of his own music. He is a rapper, and I've listened to it. It's awesome. He has nearly amassed a respectable 1,000 friends of Facebook and can also be found on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yep, you can feel free to reach out to him on any of those mediums. Kowalke.
Hey!
He is a second-year law student at William Mitchell here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and she is focusing on intellectual property and its effect on today's pop culture. Before entering the legal realm, Caitlin earned undergraduate degrees in mass media communication, a girl after my own heart. In addition to school, Caitlin currently clerks for a St. Paul-based IP firm and enjoys volunteering in the local arts community. Post-graduation, Caitlin hopes to continue working with creative professionals in business development and enforcement of intellectual property. Discussion today. So both of these staffers wrote amazing articles, student articles, on how we're facing new technologies, and I'm sorry, make sure this isn't an important text message. Okay, we're good. How we're facing new technologies when it comes to the relationship between art and online. In the last 20 years, I grew up, with Napster, where people were just stealing music, and then we had this famous case where, they said that was not allowed, and but we still haven't been able to catch up. We've come up with new systems, and so a lot can be learned still. These two staffers have written amazing articles that I think, any online company would love to have them on staff and listen to their advice as consultants or whatever it is. And so we're going to provide you, online distributors, businesses, people of the world, this free 1-hour consultation on sort of ways that you can make things better for you and for artists and for everybody that is out there creating creative content. So to get started, we're going to talk with Mihajlo, because Mihajlo wrote an article about what about content that's created on social media, which is sometimes large pieces and sometimes and how it is that relates to copyright law and what we can do for users who are making content on these social media platforms. So, Mihajlo, what makes user-generated content interesting from a copyright perspective?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of different things. First is you kind of see this elimination of like the fixation barrier, where, because the way you communicate with other people online is by writing something down or by posting a video, it's like automatically fixed and automatically kind of eligible for copyright protection, assuming it's original, of course. And, I think this is kind of a byproduct of technology and kind of how we've expanded as a people. A lot of people have phones, even more people have internet access, so it makes it super easy to like create copyrightable works all of a sudden. Also, this is kind of ubiquitous for all online media. You see just kind of this like inability to control dissemination, and I think there's a little bit of good here because you kind of like illegitimately add a bunch to the public domain, which, while illegally happening and like hurting artists, is I think like a strong public domain is like a pretty important thing. But he's also run into issues with like having to find artists. It's like difficult to find like who wrote this Facebook post first, for example, or who wrote that tweet. It's there are times when it's really hard to track that person down and like fairly compensate them. And lastly, something I think is really unique for social media is kind of like how spontaneous it is. And this is like what I like about it so much, is that it's almost like expression in its most like base sense, where you think something or you like see something funny and you like immediately write it down or take a picture and you can like post it online and be like, this is what I'm feeling like in this moment right now. And that is like such a kind of beautiful thing, I guess. It's like this beacon of expression, and I think it's really cool. It's, I think, something that social media brings us that we didn't have before.
And so can you talk a little bit about the, us as copyright people, we understand the basic requirements for copyrightability. Can you just talk really briefly for the people who are watching, what are the basic requirements for copyrightability and how does that relate to social media content?
Yeah, so there's two things. I mean, a work needs to be original and it needs to be fixed. So fixation requires, that it's in a tangible medium that can be perceived or otherwise reproduced. For all intents and purposes, you put something online, it is, if you post something on Facebook, everyone else can see it. It is like fixed there, others can see it. Originality is pretty easy as well. It's kind of this like baseline. As we know, courts try not to like be value judges, but it's just kind of a question of whether this is actually an original thought or not. And you run into weird issues with the originality requirement, specifically for something like Twitter, where it's so short. It's kind of like, is this concept long enough? I guess length is a bad idea, but length is a bad way to compare it to. But is this concept like unique enough to allow copyright protection for it? Like you don't want someone being able to copyright that they went and walk their dog, because everyone with the dog is going to go and walk it, and you can't like copyright protect that. So I think that's pretty interesting, but in general it's pretty easy to satisfy those requirements.
But what's interesting about it, and Caitlin, feel free to jump in underneath. But his original article, I thought title was pretty funny because it said, how social media has made, what was it? How social media has made copyright law as elusive as the abominable snowman, right?
Abominable snowman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember being struck by that because I said, yeah, in copyright law, we read these cases. They're like, if there's any minimal creativity and it's fixed, that it's protected. But then you're right, on copyright, and social media, we just sort of say, oh, okay, well, you signed up for it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, do you have something to say?
No, go ahead.
Caitlin.
You just froze up for a second. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, I think with the way the social media is kind of presented, the way that users use it is kind of this like, it's to interact. You know what I mean? Like you post on Facebook in order to chat with your friends or show them something cool or tell them a story, and it's writing the conversation that we have face to face, and this is just kind of like the digital age. It's like interactions online is just like, here's what it's just like, you can I talk in my paper about making a joint work out of like a Facebook post and comments on that post and having two friends talking back and forth, and in theory, but this kind of adds this whole new element of like just kind of like regular interaction and tries to bring it into the realm of copyright, which is like arguably bad because you have just kind of like something that's not even intended to be a work becoming a work that is eligible for protection,
So can you talk a little bit about some of the complications that arise with different types of content online?
Yeah, sure. With text, I kind of went over this. You have the merger doctrine, which is, there's only X number of ways to express a certain idea, and so you can't grant copyright protection to that in order to not preclude others from kind of saying the same idea later. And so you run into that, obviously, with just kind of people talking about their day. If it's kind of like a mundane thing, like, oh, I'm at work today. Everyone's at work at some point, and so you don't want to like allow copyright protection for that because it's it's ridiculous. Like people aren't going to be able to say I'm at work if like what John Doe over there said I'm at work, and then he can stop everyone else from saying the same thing. And then there's so many different types of text as well. There's the Facebook, Twitters, but then there's also blog posts and like news articles and stuff, and so it's just like such a wide range in terms of text. And then with other types of media like sound recordings or video, you run into a lot of issues where people kind of like pull this material in, then make mashups or make covers. I guess covers are okay, but you know, kind of use pre-existing material that's maybe not in the public domain, and then kind of like mash it together with their own thing. So you run into a lot of questions with you know, derivative works, and again, having trouble controlling how these works are disseminated. You know, to some extent, like it's out of your hands once you post something on the internet.
Mm. That's true. Okay, so then now here's the thing that, you know, why is it that companies are allowed to theoretically take all of these potentially copyrightable works? And that's because of terms and conditions. And I know terms and conditions, everyone knows about them, sign away and everything. And then they're kind of infamously known for being huge, so people don't read them. Can you talk about what are, you know, in a comparison of the different types of mainstream social media platforms, what are some of the common terms and conditions, and what do they look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to kind of talk in general terms here, but in general, you see, the first thing you'll notice is that when you go and look at for like your content or your IP license, they're all pretty well labeled. Like it'll say literally your content is with our website, and the first thing they will always say every single way on your content, which is true. They don't purport to take your content. They pull a license out, and a lot of the things that they get licensed are, you know, rights that they would need to distribute the website otherwise, like the right to reproduce this, to, you know, send it worldwide, to make copies, to allow people access, things like that. So there's also some bad things. So let me start with the good. The things that are good are that they're typically well labeled, and these terms and agreements are usually kind of explained in layman's terms. A really good example is LinkedIn updated their privacy or their terms and agreements maybe about a month ago, and you know, oops.
Hi, Lois.
And since then,
you're good. Huh? You're good.
Okay. And they have like a video now that explains it, and you see a lot of websites that will kind of say like, here is what we you know, like we take your work, we have the right to use your stuff, and you ultimately can control it. What I think is bad about these agreements is that kind of like the bundle of rights that they take is usually too broad. You see, the one you see in almost every terms and agreements is the right to like modify or otherwise kind of like create derivative works of your content that you post online. And that kind of concerns me, because like, what does it mean to really modify something? You know, can I post like a really opinionated Facebook and then have like against Facebook, let's say I slander them or something, and can they take my words and then like edit some things out and then totally change what I was trying to say in the first place? And so I think that's what's really bad, is that there's really kind of like no control. You end up seeing like a large portion of the bundle of rights granted by copyright licensed away and then commercialized. So these websites kind of get the right to sell your content and kind of like just say at the very beginning, like, hey, any content you give us, we might sell, and you're not going to see a dime of it, and we don't really have to tell you about it. Of course, you know, it varies site by site. If you go to stuff like SoundCloud or Bandcamp, they're more aimed at artists who are inherently more concerned about what's going to happen to their content, who owns it, how it's going to be used, and so you see these websites kind of go to a bigger effort to explain, like, hey, look, you know, your licensing has these rights, and it's so that we can do A, B, and C, and because of this, you know, we need to get granted this, but we just ask you for your content. I mentioned, I guess, LinkedIn earlier, because when I started writing my paper, LinkedIn hadn't updated their privacy policy, and I gotta say it was the worst one of them all. Like LinkedIn, as their policy was before, was like they could literally take your work, and I think within the license could have like taken a book written a book of like user posted content and then sold it totally commercially without having to like do anything with the users. And now it's kind of like, I think quite a good example of what would be a good terms and service, where they're like, you know what, you control when you want to take your stuff off. We are going to tell you before we commercialize your content, things like that. And I think that's an important step, and I think that they're kind of like the golden standard now, if you will.
That's great. Let's see here. So now here's the big question, right? So in the arts, we're always trying to figure out, I probably spend every single day thinking, how can I make money off art? Mm-hmm. And if all of a sudden we're talking about, okay, the stuff that's on social media detectable, and maybe these companies are using this material to make money through ad revenue or whatever system that they're, how they make their money. Can you tell us, like, do you think that social media sites should start paying their users for the content they create?
Yeah, that's a big question. Let me start by just like saying some things that I think are facts. First is that I think a large majority of user-generated content doesn't get that popular. I've certainly made Facebook posts and tweets that get absolutely no attention, and while soul-crushing that is, I mean, the fact is that just doesn't earn anyone money, And along with that are the questions of like, was this reposted? Who was the first person that posted this? I mean, surely we've all seen Facebook posts that are on BuzzFeed as like, and when you see that, it's like you don't see the person's profile picture, you don't see their name, for better or for worse, of course. Mm-hmm. And also, you kind of like, how do you measure a post's success? I think is a really good question, because you run into this interesting framework where if you say, if you give someone 50 likes on Facebook, their work doesn't necessarily need to be like original or copyrightable for them to earn that money in that case. And so it's like not a copyright, it's like a copyright royalty or anything like that. It's more like your post is popular, here's the money you get. And so there are websites that are starting to pay users. The ones that come to mind are Bubbles, Bonzomi, and tsu.com, and they all kind of purport to pay users based on like interactivity. I know they basically pay users 50% of the ad revenue, and then like if you brought a user to their service, you get like a small cut. So it kind of like kind of builds on like both how many people view your stuff, how many people interact with it, and then like kind of like combines it all with like users in your network, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. To some extent, it might be best to just kind of wait and see. But I think at the end of the day, it's outright paying users is necessarily the most fair thing to do, and I don't think it's super attainable. And so I'm not saying that social media sites shouldn't pay users. I just think that they should be paying users perhaps just when they commercialize their content, rather than just like for posting any content in general.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then do you think that, let's say that they want to create a system where I am in DC and I take this really great photo of on social media, and then somebody starts like gives it to the Associated Press. I know that was a pretty famous situation. And then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to get paid for this? I put it on social media. Now social media has put it other places that are going to be used at newspaper sources. And so do you think that there is sometime in the future an ability for someone like that where they made something that was marketable to be paid? Do you think that's an attainable goal?
I think it can be. The nice thing about putting that, to some extent, it kind of like documents when and where it first appeared. Like if you really, if you were really determined, I'm sure you could find like what the first time was, because everything is time marked, right? That being said, I mean, it kind of depends, to me at least, whether like who sold it or who gave the rights away, or who kind of like profited the most off of getting it to the Associated Press, because you could always make the argument that by posting anything online, you kind of lose control of it. There's a study by, man, it's blanking on me right now. There's a study done by the Internet Watch Foundation. And over a 4-week period, they tracked something like 12,000 pictures and videos online. And after those 4 weeks, they found that like 10,000 plus of those pictures, so something a little bit more than 88% of those pictures they were tracking had like appeared on parasitic websites that are, let's say, like websites that just kind of like take the material and host it for clicks. After that 4-week period. And so, I mean, that's a large percentage of work. And so you could always make the argument that by posting anything online, you kind of like understand the risks associated with doing that, that you kind of are like throwing it into the wind, for lack of a better word, and like it's gone. You know what I mean? So whoever it comes to can take it. But
what do you have to say about, okay, so I get what you're saying, but just sort of be devil's advocate, is that today we are in an online marketplace, and so like you're kind of like accepting it by putting your content out there. But you know, for many artists, like that's, you know, social media has provided them an opportunity to market in a way that they never have. And so when presented with the option of no social media versus social media and questionably some sketchy intellectual property clauses, you know, do you think that that creates a problem too? That maybe we should, because of the environment of the art world, that we should be changing things?
Yeah. I mean, certainly when you post like a work on Facebook, let's say you post a picture on Facebook and it gets picked up by some media outlet. When you post on Facebook, assuming you've kind of like managed your privacy settings a little bit, like you don't really expect that picture to be seen by, you know, anyone who's not a friend of a friend, and you don't really expect it to be seen anywhere outside of Facebook, you know. And so the question is like, who has the ability to actually control where this work goes? And to some extent, I mean, Facebook is just like more capable of being like, yo, look, this was first posted on our website, and we kind of had this inherent duty to like stay with our users. And so certainly, I mean, I would say if your post just kind of gets pulled off Facebook and gets taken somewhere else, I mean, you definitely deserve credit for that work. Particularly if it ends up on like a high traffic website where there's, you know, a bunch of money going to ad revenue. Like the user deserves the compensation for the use of their stuff.
All right, and then the last thing, you know, I want to ask you is, okay, you're Zuckerberg and the Google team, and you say, okay, what should we do to help users? What would you say?
There's a couple of things. I think first is making the terms and conditions a little bit more clear. There's definitely an effort to do this, as I said earlier, by just kind of like trying to explain in layman's terms what the terms of service agreements are doing. But I think they could be explained a little bit more accurate, a little bit more in depth, kind of saying like, look, we don't take your content, but we do, you know, take the right to distribute it as well as modify it, and then also like commercialize it. Like a lot of users probably don't really care, so they don't look into it, or they don't even think of their work as copyrightable, so they have no idea. So I think it's important that the websites take the affirmative step and let users know. And kind of along the same vein is for them to not take such a large bundle of rights. For me, it seems like they take too much. Social media websites kind of, you know, slim it down a little bit, take just the rights that are necessary for them to continue to function, for them to actually carry out the service that they're carrying out, rather than the ability, you know, the modifying one I brought up earlier is the one that's really most concerning to me, because, you know, you put something online and then what is modification? You know, what can they do to my work and then market it as their own? You know what I mean? Or even change it and then still say that I said it, even though it's not at all what I had said. And then lastly, I just think like approval of the user, if you're gonna commercialize it, at the very least be like, you know, contact the user and say, hey, we want to use your picture in advertising, we want to sell it to this like media, and then allow the user a chance to negotiate for a price, or allow the user to outright deny the use of their work.
Very good. All right. So now we had this wonderful conversation about user content on social media sites. And I like that discussion because to me in the entertainment industry, there's sort of this people that we acknowledge as professional artists, and then there's people that create art but they're not professional artists in the sense that they don't, negotiate contracts. They don't put themselves out there as being a professional artist. But under copyright law, I mean, they should theoretically be treated the same. So that's interesting. But now we want to move into a conversation with Caitlin about musicians who are stereotypically professional artists who go out there and they put their songs on the radio and they make CDs and they go on tour and they have their songs on Pandora and Spotify, and how it is that distribution of those songs or distribution of works that are put together, that are produced, and then how it relates to how much they are getting paid in terms of royalties or more in terms of online music play. And so to get started, Caitlin, and feel free to chime in, Milo, how has the recent surge in popular music distribution services affected artists and increased audience pressures to produce music at a more rapid speed?
I think one of the biggest issues we're seeing right now with online music distribution is that it's good because artists have more direct access to fans than they ever have before through websites like Spotify and Facebook and Twitter and every social media platform. But unfortunately, so does every other artist. So this puts a lot of pressure on every artist to shorten their release cycle and pump out music more quickly than they maybe had to before, which isn't a bad thing. Music dissemination in general is always good. But it's putting a lot of pressure, especially on artists that are self-funded and are working for independent labels that maybe have less financial support behind them.
So then, we recently saw on the news that Taylor Swift is pulling out of, was she pulling out of Spotify or Pandora or both?
Both, yeah.
Both, okay. And, other musicians might be following her, or they've chosen to from the beginning to pull out of these online radio plays. Do you think that Taylor Swift has a point?
I do. To an extent, I think Taylor Swift has a point. Streaming services claim that artists are making a lot of money off streaming. And that, in general, has kind of created some distrust within the industry. Online music distributors aren't very forthcoming with the overall revenue that they're getting, and as well as they're not very forthcoming with the payouts for the artists that they currently support. And I think somewhat of an even bigger issue is that artists generally don't have a good idea of what they should be even making in royalties from online distribution to begin with. And so Taylor Swift's viewpoint that she's come out saying is that free tiered music services like Spotify and Pandora diminish the value of her work and other artists' work as well. And she has the right to pull that music off those platforms. The fact that she's uncomfortable with their business model alone is enough to justify that action. Spotify, of course, has publicly come out and said that the whole reason for their existence is to help fans find music and to help artists connect with fans through a new platform. And I don't think there's anything to suggest they're not doing that. But also, the compensation that platforms like Spotify are providing artists is very likely not after the amount of work every artist is putting into to put that out there. I guess it's fine.
Do you think part of it is just the fact that we, as a society, just have kind of skewed perceptions on what our rights are to have access to music?
Yeah, I mean, now more than ever, I think music is so easily attainable and obtainable from anywhere that it's hard to put a monetary value on it anymore. Nobody thinks anything of picking up a smartphone and turning on YouTube and watching something. You don't even think that that's possibly hurting the artist. And it's going to be a hard burden to overcome in trying to more financially support artists.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the statutory changes. So your paper was specifically about the proposed Songwriter Equity Act that's currently being thought about in Congress right now, correct?
Correct, yep.
Okay. And then can you talk about how that act or acts like that or systems like that affect the current music industry?
So specifically, the Songwriter Equity Act is suggesting a replacement of the mechanical royalty rate that artists would be paid on online distribution models. So in theory, by raising that to a more fair market value, the hope is that users would start to pay artists in a way that they think is more appropriate to the work that they put out. I think the big issue we would see with a mechanical royalty rate being raised would be the increased cost to consumers, and that it's touch and go, because a lot of users do want to support artists and they do want to financially help out the people that they're listening to, but at the same time the tendencies for piracy are already there, so increased pricing might enable that to take a step further in the wrong direction.
And as far as both artist compensation and user value are concerned, what is the best possible scenario for the future of online music distribution? And is that best possible scenario even realistic?
Possible. I mean, considering society is so drastically converted to online media consumption, I do think that digital distribution is the answer. I think Spotify and Pandora and sites like that are onto something good. Users want safe material and they want it cheap and fast, and I mean, users don't want to have to go out and search every BitTorrent site to get a new CD. But at the same time, I think the current streaming services aren't providing artists with the fair compensation they need. And I think a change as simple as raising subscription fees would fix it. It's just a matter of kind of getting that audience education in place, that the reason these prices are going to be raised is to support artists that you're already listening to. And so, you know, I think it's going to be a long road. I just online distribution isn't going to happen overnight. But, you know, you can kind of see it already working in television distribution, where people are willing to pay the $10 a month to have access to Hulu and Netflix. And Spotify has come out and said that 80% of the subscribers that they have who are paying for services did start out as free users. So it is clear that users are starting to see some benefit in financially supporting the artists that they're listening to.
But you mentioned to me at one point that the problem with Spotify is that they haven't made any money yet, correct?
Yeah, not enough to support the artists, not enough to go around. I mean, Spotify's obviously making money off advertising, but it hasn't been enough to provide fair compensation for artists yet. And
then, you know, let's say that online music distribution sources convert to a more mutually beneficial business model. What is the likelihood a modern consumer will convert to these sort of rehabilitated?
Oh, sorry, you froze up on me.
Oh, that's okay. So I was just asking, so let's say that these online distributors, they convert to something that's a little bit more mutually beneficial for the artists and then for the users. What is the chance that a modern consumer who has this sort of like, I want music now, I want it fast, I don't care about how much money people are getting. What do you think how likely is it that they'll be willing to convert to these rehabilitated services?
I mean, to an extent, piracy is always going to exist. That's not going away, and that's not something that online music distribution is going to totally combat. But I honestly believe if people realize that the artists that they're listening to aren't being fairly compensated, they would be less likely to use the outright pirated illegal sources. I think that platforms like Spotify and Pandora offering free tiers is something that we're going to see diminish. I think that by raising those prices even slightly, there's just going to be more compensation across the board for all of the artists. And I do think that hopefully in years to come, online distribution services will begin to recognize the value of starting to provide more financial support for different artists, and especially those emerging artists that are working for independent labels or who are self-promoted.
So since we have some time here, I think that it'd be kind of interesting to talk. I know that this whole time we've talked about, what will we say to these online distributors or these social media media platforms. But let's say that there's somebody watching this who is like, oh my gosh, like I really want to be able to help out my band or my favorite band, or I really want to make sure that artists are getting paid more. As a consumer, like what would you guys recommend to them? Like how can they be more artist friendly?
I guess I can say something quick. Kayla and I probably disagree on online distribution in general, but I think that
what do you think, Mahilo?
I've kind of given up on online distribution of music. I think that it's so easy now to pirate or get things free that charging people too much is clearly going to drive them away. And I feel like to some extent you just have to accept it for what it is and like try to make money through other avenues. And so having like these niche markets created by easy access to music, I think makes like more what's the word I'm looking for? Like more enthusiastic fan base. So I think that the best way to support a band or something would be just their merchandise, go to their shows, interact with them on Twitter, on Facebook, and kind of like spread the word rather than like pay for their music outright.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a good point, and I think that kind of when Taylor Swift's pulling her music off Spotify, that's clearly not hurting Taylor Swift. She already has a huge fan base. She doesn't need Spotify's business. But when you're talking about new artists that don't have that fan base, Spotify and Pandora and YouTube and Twitter and everything else are good platforms for kind of spec work for artists to see. And, there are other avenues for them to be making income. And I do think to an extent that's good, but I also think that at some point we need to draw the line and start working at finding a way to compensate them for the work they're doing.
Yeah. So like if you were, let's say, somebody want to say, okay, I want to be more ethical, right? Not just this idea of like consumer, I think what Mihailo is talking about is like the how realistic it is for like masses of people to move over. And maybe that's not a dream that masses are going to start doing that. But there are people that I think if they listen, they listen to this podcast, they say, I want to be more ethical with my music purchasing. But then what would you say to them? Do you think iTunes, like going out and buying iTunes, getting a Spotify subscription, buying albums, what would you say to that?
I mean, it's a personal opinion, but I believe that, going out and buying straight, it doesn't even have to be the album. You can buy singles. Like iTunes, I think, is a great place. Artists get a good turnaround off iTunes sales. And so ethically, I think that's your best option. But I think in today's market, especially younger generations more and more want streaming. And so if that's the case, then I hope that services like Pandora and like Spotify will start to, raise subscriptions or find another way to be, adding in revenue so that they can compensate the artists that they support.
Maybe creating something like you can buy a family pack for your whole family, like on Netflix, where 5 users can have for $25 a month, have access to our massive music list.
Sure, and I could see a music distribution model that's really similar to like cable TV or Sirius Radio, where you can kind of market it towards certain people and certain lifestyles and certain needs. And, base price points off something like that.
Yeah, that's great. Mihailo, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on this, the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, as a consumer, I think like right now is the best time to consume media ever.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's so easy to get at anything you want, like all these niche markets.
Sounds like you have an addiction.
I do have an addiction to the internet. I don't know. It's hard because distribution is like a hard word for me now, because I think distribution implies that you like have total control over who can see your content or how they're going to get it or how they're going to consume it. And I mean, I think that's like a dangerous and really just like completely false assumption to make in like the internet age. And God, I mean, as a user, what do? I mean, I pay for Netflix, I pay for Spotify. I mean, quite honestly, I'm not super excited about paying for music on iTunes because I think it's just quite honestly overpriced. I mean, I can in 5 minutes go on Google and like find an illegal way to download an album. And so it's just like that. The price I'm willing to pay for access to music is really based on just like having a service that is easy to use, like consistent to access, and has like as large of a library as possible. And I think, I mean, to expect users to actually go out and like pay for physical copies or digital copies is like, yeah, it's a bit much. I mean, it's just like we've tasted the holy nectar, if you will, and like after that, nothing's the same anymore.
Well, I mean, I think about myself, and when I was like a teenager, my friends and I used to burn each other's CDs. But then the second that I like, I've always been pro artist. So the second that I was like, oh, that's hurting artists, I stopped, right? And I just stopped.
Yeah.
But Mahila, do you mind sharing a little bit, like your first title? Mahila wrote an article last year, and his first line in his paper was,
I've never paid for a song in my life, which isn't true, by the way.
Well, but now you are, like you just said, you buy Netflix, you buy Spotify. So, like, for me, it was like the second I just heard, oh, it hurts artists, I just switched. What was it that made you switch? Other than the fact that you're going to be a lawyer.
Other than I would yell at you if you weren't.
Yeah, seriously. I use like Pandora and Spotify free for a while. I'm one of those people who hates the ads a lot. So like one of the reasons I'm like so happy I pay for Spotify now is that I don't have to listen to like the same ad every 30 minutes. Like that just crushes the experience for me. But like, having so much music just on hand, like either on my phone or my computer, I can actually control my computer from my phone now on Spotify, which is sweet. And like, I mean, it's just like ease of access that did it for me. I mean, it makes sense. It's like worth the. I mean, I know it's not the perfect solution, but it's better than nothing, I guess.
So like the competition is almost in like the features. It's not even in the music anymore. It's like how fast can you get to the computer? That's like what makes you as a consumer kind of motivated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously having like a large music selection is phenomenal, but like if I really wanted to get any song, I could do it like illegally. I mean, it's just a question of how long it would take me. You know what I mean? Or like how much I care. But I think that this is a hard thing to like. But like, I mean, it's pretty clear that having like these free options, these like cheap options that are like easy to use, easy to access, and like widely available, or just decrease piracy in general because people are too lazy to pirate at some point,
Well, and it's just that like I even see it. You see it with TV distribution as well, where yeah, sure, you can go on Project TV and find any TV show you want and watch it for free, but you might have to try 12 links before it works. And I think users just want something really easy and really digestible. What?
And get a virus.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that the music industry really just needs a simple answer. They need something that works really well and gets users a wide variety of content. And whoever can get to that fastest for the cheapest, I think is going to come out with the most consumer use. Right now, there's just not a good solution. There's not a good product on the market yet.
And then since I have the both of you here, I just have one question for like some myth busting, right? So a lot of people, they'll say, oh, well, bands get all their money from touring and merchandise sales, which is, partially true. But can one of you guys explain those 360 contracts that are coming up?
Yeah, I can do it. Unless Caitlin wants to take it.
Go for it.
Okay. So 360 deals kind of allow record labels to dip their hands in every income source that an artist gets. So how it used to work is they would front you money to record and distribute your CD, and then they would take the profit until they were paid back, and then get like a royalty for whatever forever, basically. And now, because they're not making so much income off CD sales, off album sales, they are starting to take a cut of merchandising sales, tour sales, really any money that a band makes outside of like physically selling their music. which I mean, it just means that it means that the artist gets less money at the end of the day.
And then oh no, keep going. That's fine.
Okay. I recently actually read this. I guess it was a keynote speech by Steve Albini at the Melbourne Face Music Conference, where he talks about online distribution as it faces music, and he makes, I think, a pretty compelling argument about just kind of how the music industry is the way that it is. Like, you can't turn the clock back, but like talks about the benefits of online distribution and how you've kind of eliminated the middleman to some extent, where now, you know, any artist can go spend a couple $100, get a rig, be able to record themselves, produce to their fans, and that, you know, while you can't really control your work anymore, you can reach your fans on a more like intimate level, and you know, how that is a good thing for the music industry in some sense, because there's not so much distance between like the artists and the fans, and so the fans get more they want, and so they're like more excited for it, and kind of how that correlates into like getting more people. Like shows are more expensive now than they ever were before. You know what I mean? You pay $120 to go see Kanye West at like a sold out, you know, 60,000 person show.
Is that from personal experience, Mahilo?
No, I've never actually seen Kanye in concert, but I would love to. I love Kanye.
I heard he was at Garth Brooks last weekend.
Really?
No, you, not Kanye.
Oh, me? Oh, nah. Anyways, I think people are willing to pay more for like the experiences associated with bands rather than the music themselves. So, I mean, time will tell really what works and what doesn't. But
okay, so if that's your viewpoint, do you think that maybe the future is looking at more like crowdfunding and Kickstarter like things?
I actually really do like that model. It reminds me of like patronage of classical composers in like the 1600s. Like a social patronage system. I'm really into that. I think that's a great idea. My problem with it is that, like, again, talking about small unknown artists, it's like hard to break into that, because unless you have like a fan base, you're not going to be able to crowdfund a CD. But I do think that's a really cool idea. You can get fans involved in kind of the production aspect of the CD and get them to pay more money. And it's certainly kind of like again, like eliminating the middleman, I think is what the industry is going to do over time, and I think that's really cool. Then you're going to see the artists get just like a higher cut of less money, so maybe at the end of the day it'll kind of balance out to what it was 15 years ago.
Sure.
And then Caitlin, do you want to talk a little bit about the best part about Caitlin's article? I mean, she has amazing parts of her article, but my favorite part is her first footnote. It says, like, if you don't want to read this article, just look at this like comic strip on oatmeal. And do you want to explain what the comic strip said?
So one of our notes and comments editor found this great oatmeal comic, and it kind of just showed music distribution through the time. You know, it goes back to Napster and kind of where it ended up. It's like where music should go, and that's just, you know, one consumer handing one artist kind of what they think the fair compensation is for their usage of that music. And so I guess in that sense, you know, kind of circling back to the Kickstarter campaign, whatever conversation we just had, you know, I like the idea of I have certain artists who I rampantly support and love so much that I would love to hand $100 to and say, you know, use this for whatever you want, you know. But then there's artists that I was like, okay, well, I'll listen to your album once and hand you $2. Like, I think it needs to get to somewhere in between those, where it's just a consumer paying for what they use.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you guys, I got to get off a little bit early just because I have to prepare for our next Google Hangout. But you guys have any closing thoughts?
Pay for your media and care about your rights, because nobody really does.
Yes, pay for your media.
Pay for your media. Awesome.
Always.
Wonderful final words. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for organizing, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.